Okay, please be seated. Mr. Champagne, your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Joseph Gabbard to the stand.
Come on up to the witness stand, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat, but you got to talk louder.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Joe Gabbard. I worked for the Sheriff's Department. No longer there, working for Southern Youth Tribal Rangers at the time.
And just for the record, how do you spell your last name?
Gabbard.
You said you currently work for the Southern Youth Tribal Rangers?
Yes.
Can you just briefly describe what that means and what you do there?
Been there a little over 2 years. What we do is we're pretty much the tribal police for the natural resources of the Southern Youth Tribe.
Very good. And before that, you described the Sheriff's Office for La Plata County. What did you do there and how long did you work there?
Worked there for 18 years. Last part of my career there, I was an investigator, criminal investigator.
And, sir, how should I refer to you now? Ranger Gabbard, or what's the appropriate nomenclature?
On duty, yes, it would be Ranger Gabbard.
Okay. Ranger Gabbard. Did you have any role in the investigation of Mark Redwine and Dylan Redwine?
I did.
And I want to direct your attention to the early stages of the case. November 2012. You recall that time period?
I do.
And during that time period, were you involved in any of the searches that were going on in the Vallecito area at that time?
I was.
And can you tell us about what your role was in some of those different searches?
Depending on the search, I was in charge of putting searches together, being in charge of people, areas of what was being searched, collecting evidence, logging evidence in.
Do you recall being involved in a search of Middle Mountain Road on November 23rd, 2012?
That I do.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you remember about that?
Serves me right. We tried to drive to the top of Middle Mountain. It was just too snowy. We couldn't make it to the top.
Okay. Do you remember who you were with?
Investigator Hendricks.
Okay. And during that time, did you collect any evidence relevant to this case?
Not during that search, no.
On November 23rd, it was already too snowy to get to the top of Middle Mountain Road?
Yes, it was.
Do you recall about how far you got?
If I recall correctly, it was a couple miles from the top.
Okay. So you were able, okay. That's fine, thank you. Do you recall being involved in any helicopter searches of the Vallecito area?
Yes. I kind of set those up.
Okay. How did you go about setting those up?
I was already acquaintances with Rob Gross, who was the lead helicopter pilot in San Juan County, New Mexico. So I called him to see if he could assist with the search, and he was able to.
Okay. Do you recall, so were you actually on the helicopter?
No, I was not.
And did you give instructions to these helicopter operators or pilots to search particular areas?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall which areas you asked them to search?
The first search I remember was pretty much the Vallecito Lake area, Middle Mountain, and the rivers going into Vallecito.
Okay. And do you recall that being November 24th, 25th, 2012? Does that sound right to you?
Around that time, yes.
Okay. Were there other areas besides just Vallecito Lake and the inlets, so the rivers coming into it?
With other searches, yes.
Okay. And during that November 2012 helicopter search, did you also request them to search the Middle Mountain area?
Yes, Middle Mountain Road area and surrounding, actually, around Middle Mountain Road.
Were there other bodies of water that you requested them to search as well?
With later searches, I would have to refer to my report on the first one. I do know that we eventually went to Lemon Reservoir, Navajo, all the surrounding lakes up the Animas Valley. And they actually did Morgan Lake, which is right across the state line in New Mexico off of Highway 140.
Sounds like there were multiple helicopter searches that you organized.
Yes.
Let's just go back to that first one. If I showed you a map of the areas searched, would you recognize it?
Yes.
If I may approach?
Yes.
Exhibit 496. Does that look like, well, I should ask you what you see there?
The Bicito Lake area and Middle Mountain Road.
And there's areas denoted in red on that map. What do those areas denote?
That is the lake itself, Old Timer Campground, and Middle Mountain Road.
Are those fair and accurate depictions of the areas you requested to be searched by the helicopter in November 2012?
That is.
We move to admit. Exhibit 496.
No objection. Oh, excuse me. 496 is admitted.
Thank you. Move to publish, please. All right, I put that up on the screen for us. Can you just basically describe to the jury what we're seeing there in red?
So what you're seeing is the Old Timer Campground. Just to the left of that is the dam. It goes up to the north. The north end of the lake, there is a road that goes to the top of Middle Mountain, known as Middle Mountain Road.
And the areas in red, do they accurately reflect the areas that the helicopter searched?
That they do.
Now, did you have any involvement in any of the searching of Lake Bicito during the same rough time period, early or late November of 2012?
I did assist with setting up a dive team.
A dive team, and where did that dive team come in from?
They came in from New Mexico.
All right. And did they in fact dive and search the lake?
They did.
Can you tell us anything else about that, any more detail?
I don't know exact areas that they dove. I was on land following up on other stuff, just trying to help them whenever I could.
Okay. So fair to say you arranged it, but then left them to conduct the search themselves?
Yes.
Did you have any role in arranging a sonar search of the lake in 2012?
I assisted with finding a sonar for them to use.
Okay.
Apparently they had one, but it wasn't there yet or something of that.
And at risk of taking you out of your comfort zone, can you briefly describe what sonar is and what it does?
Sonar is pretty much painting a picture of items under the water.
All right. Are you aware of whether a sonar search was in fact conducted in November 2012?
I believe it was.
Okay. As we look at 496 again, the dive team, the sonar, is that also encompassed in the red area covering Bicito Lake, those searches?
Yes.
Was there another search of Lake Bicito in the spring of 2013?
Yes, there was.
Okay. Were you involved in setting that up or any of the arrangements?
Wasn't really involved with setting it up. I went out with them on the water.
Okay. You were actually in the boat?
Yes, it was.
And any of these searches, the helicopter searches, the sonar searches, the boat searches in the spring of 2013, did any of those produce any relevant evidence in this case?
No, they did not.
And the helicopter searches, you said that there were other searches that were ongoing, is that right?
Yes.
Including a search of Lake Morgan and other areas. Did that continue on into the spring of 2013?
That it did.
And again, these helicopter searches, did those produce any relevant evidence in the case?
They did not.
As an investigator in the case, were you aware of whether any tips came into the sheriff's office during the early stages and ongoing throughout the case?
There were numerous tips.
And how were those tips handled?
They were kind of given out to the investigators to follow up on as they came in.
Okay. Did you handle tips yourself?
I did.
And what were the instructions, or what was the strategy regarding these tips? How were you approaching them?
We would follow every tip. We would make contact with absolutely everybody and try to follow it all the way to the end.
Now, some of these tips that came in were fairly outlandish. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And why did you follow those tips, even though they came in and you were perhaps skeptical?
You never know. You got to follow it. It might produce something.
Okay. And did you, in fact, use that strategy in your approach to that work?
Yes.
How many tips do you think you followed up with?
Oh, goodness, I have no idea. A lot.
More than 100?
That'd be a pretty good number.
Okay. Did any of these tips help produce evidence that helped you find Dylan Redwine?
No.
As part of your role in the investigation, did you take any DNA buccal swabs from any of the involved parties?
Yes, I did.
And who did you take buccal swabs from?
Corey and Elaine Redwine.
Okay. Does Elaine Redwine also go by Elaine Hall? Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
And how did you go about that? Meaning, like, specifically, what are the details of taking a buccal swab from another person?
The swabs are individually packaged. So you open up the end away from the swab, pull the swab out, doing mouth swabs, gathering saliva from the cheeks. Then you insert that swab back into the package that it came in, and then it's put into a manila envelope and either put into evidence or sent up to CBI.
Okay. Are you taking precautions to make sure that the cotton end remains, uncontaminated and sterile?
Yes.
What type of precautions did you do to that effect?
Gloved up, making sure that the swab does not make contact with anything else but the inside of the mouth and the package, inside of the package.
Was that the procedure you followed when you took the swabs from Ms. Hall and Mr. Redwine?
I did.
Mr. Corey Redwine. If I showed you those envelopes that you packaged them in, would you recognize them?
I would.
Okay. Let me approach with exhibits 332 and 333.
You may.
Would you like to see these, Counsel?
You may.
Do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
And what are they?
They are the swabs that I took from Corey and Elaine.
How do you recognize them?
My writing and the remarks on.
Okay. And now, are you aware of whether those swabs were sent off for testing?
That I don't know.
Are you able to examine the packaging to determine if, in fact, that may have occurred?
Yes.
Okay. And other than the packaging that reflects that, are they in the same or substantially the same condition as when you packaged them?
Yes, they are.
Move to admit 332, 333.
Mr. Moran? They're both admitted.
Thank you. I'd like to change topics with you, if that's all right. Did you have a role in acquiring phone records for Mark Redwine's Landline in, I believe it was 2012?
I did.
Tell us about your role in that.
I wrote a search warrant to CenturyLink for his landline information.
All right. And why CenturyLink?
That was his server for the landline at his residence.
And you said you wrote a search warrant. Was that required by the company?
Yes.
All right. And do you recall which date range you were requesting on those records?
requesting the 18th through the 20th
Okay.
of November 2012.
And did you in fact receive those records?
I did. The first time they came back, the dates got a little mixed up and we had to get the records again.
Okay. Did you eventually get the records that you were requesting
Yes,
for the correct date ranges?
yes,
And that's the 18th to the 20th of November 2012, is that right?
correct.
All right. If I showed you those records, would you recognize them?
I would.
334? You recognize those?
I do.
Do they look to be the same records that you received from CenturyLink during the course of your investigation?
Yes,
Do they fair and accurately reflect the records that you received from CenturyLink?
yes.
Move to admit. Sorry, 334, excuse me.
Your Honor, I think if there needs to be a record laid for business records before this hearsay would be admissible. Objection.
Your Honor, these were subject to pretrial pleading by the people. We do have an attestation of accuracy from the custodian of records. That was filed with the court as one of our records that we sought to admit under 902, I believe it's B11, is that correct?
Okay, and I don't remember, I did do an outline of all my orders, but I don't
Yes.
remember writing that one down. Did I say these could come in?
Judge, it's a notice that's required under.
Oh, that's right,
902.11, given the defense the opportunity to object, which they did not.
Okay. And we do have the attestation of records. I will allow 334 to come in there. Well,
I have the,
in terms of the admissions, I mean, they're here, and the attestation is to get around the business records attestation?
yes,
I think I saw that
authenticity.
this morning. Okay.
Yes. And I have the attestation, if the court would like it, counsel wants to review it.
Mr. Moran, do you want to see that or not?
Please.
Yes.
Your Honor, I would note for the record, this is the purpose of the pretrial pleading and notice requirement under 902.
Right, and the attestation gets you around the hearsay rule, is my understanding, so.
Hearsay and authenticity, Your Honor.
Right.
So,
So we'll see if they have anything to say about it.
Good, thank you.
So, oh, you just.
This looks almost in order. It just doesn't list a specific phone number for a subscriber.
Your Honor, the format that
I'm
these
not sure
records,
what this is attesting to.
Mr. Champagne?
the format that these records take and an attestation is that the records are produced along with the attestation from the business that produced them and the custodian of records who reviewed them for accuracy. And I would note, just for timeliness, that the purpose of the notice is for pretrial objection and hearings on these topics, not mid-trial. Happy to show these to Mr. Moran out of, courtesy during during the case, but I believe any time for objection is long past.
The notice would be required, but you've still got to get around the hearsay objection with a proper attestation. This isn't linked to anything. It gives me a date.
Hold on. You have had this marked as 335, correct? The attestation part?
Yes, Your Honor.
Got it?
I think I've reviewed it sufficiently if the court wants this copy.
I'll look at what I have. If I can find it. It was 335?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me have that one. I've got your exhibits in two different areas, the way you guys gave them to me.
Our apologies.
This works.
And it was accompanied by the records contained in 334. I'm sorry, Judge, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, you did cut me off, but that's okay. My understanding of this is this has to be attached to the exhibit, correct? Or,
Well, Judge, they arrived attached when we received them from the company. We separated
well, lay
them.
that foundation. So I think you have to have some testimony to that. If there's an objection, is there? Okay. And normally, don't take them off next time.
Okay. Yeah. Judge,
Wherever 335 is, do we have it? Is this it for us? Because I'm going to make it a court exhibit.
that's fine. That was yes, that's fine. That exhibit does not, I don't believe, need to be presented to the jurors.
That's why it's a court exhibit.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, but I need testimony as to whether or not, how it came.
In that case, Judge, what I'd like to make the court aware is that this will be conditionally, we'll request conditional admission because the attestation was actually received by a different witness at a later time.
Well, I think because I'm going to have trouble keeping this straight. I mean, I will admit it once I have that testimony, but I don't think we can put it in right now.
Okay.
Okay?
That's fine, Judge. What I'll have then is the witness who received the attestation and the records discuss the records that they reviewed. Because as I understand it, what you're telling me is this witness can't testify about these, or I can't publish them to the jury.
Correct. There's still an objection. I have to have that testimony first. And were this a different case, 3-4 days long, that wouldn't be a problem. Okay?
Right.
It's a longer case, and I'm just not going to remember.
Okay, that's fine, Judge.
Okay. I'll hang on to this for now.
Thank you. So did you participate in a large-scale search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
That date sounds about right. I would have to review my report a little bit.
Sure. Maybe I can anchor it for you with a landmark. This was the search where the remains of Dylan Redwine were actually found.
Okay.
You recall being a part of that process?
I do.
And do you recall your role in that search?
Just leading search teams.
Okay. Do you recall that a shoe and a sock were found, eventually identified as Dylan Redwine's?
I do remember that.
Do you recall being, I believe it was with Investigator Cowling, conducting a search, and that you actually yourself found evidence related to the case?
Yes, I do.
Tell us about that.
We were doing a line search in the area, the general area of where some items were found, and we noticed some scat on the ground. We broke the scat apart and found what appeared to be a toe or a finger bone. For those of us unfamiliar, you use the term scat. What do you mean, sir? Animal waste.
Feces?
Feces.
Okay. So you were actually breaking apart pieces of animal feces when you found this, is that correct? Was this part of the normal pattern of searching when you were out there working that day?
It's a very grown area, grown up with shrubs and whatnot, so everything was getting moved, and we were just breaking up everything that we could.
Okay. So this wasn't unusual that you were breaking apart pieces of animal scat?
No.
If I showed you pictures of that animal scat in the field, would you recognize it?
I would.
131, 132, and 133. Let me approach.
You may.
Do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
And what are they?
That is the animal scat with the bone.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate depictions of what you saw that day in the field?
That they are.
All right. Move to admit 131, 132, and 133.
Mr. Moran?
No objection, thank you.
You're admitted.
Motion to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you step down from the stand using the pointer there, speaking into the microphone next to the television, and describe to the jury what we see in Exhibit 131? So is the microphone working?
No. So what we're seeing is the actual scat. This was pieced together. This is what was broke apart to find this little fraction of bone.
And I'm going to move on to 132. What do we see in this picture?
It's the same scat with the bone.
Okay.
The scale.
And how could you tell that this was either what you described as a possible toe or finger?
It's just the shape of it.
Okay.
We just knew that it wasn't right and needed to be checked.
Was there a nail, like a fingernail or toenail?
There was a nail on the very end of it. I believe.
Okay. Can you show us where that nail is on this picture?
That is right here.
Okay. And when you were out in the field, was this something that you found unusual?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to determine at that moment whether it was human or non-human?
No, we had to have it tested.
Thanks. You can have a seat again, please. Did you record the GPS location for that item?
I did.
Okay. And how did you know that the GPS was, how did you go about that?
Running our GPS, and sometimes we would relate it to another GPS to see if the coordinates were the same.
Okay. And did you have a chance to review some shots of an animation, a Google Earth animation done by investigator Heidel in this case?
I did.
And did those look to be fair and accurate to the location where you found that coyote scat or whatever animal scat?
Yes, it did.
Part of your role in the case, did you develop contacts with any local wildlife experts regarding animal behavior?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall who it is, without saying what they told you, who it is that you spoke to?
Yes, I do.
And what was his name or her name?
His name was Drayton Harrison.
And do you know what his role was within wildlife?
He was a game warden.
A game warden?
Yes.
Okay. And did he direct you to any other wildlife experts for further discussion?
Yes, he did.
And do you recall that person's name?
I would have to look at my report for that.
Does the name Heather Johnson sound familiar?
That sounds correct.
All right. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, sir. Were there ongoing searches up on Middle Mountain after the remains were found that you participated in?
Yes, there was.
And do you recall a search in May of 2014 that you participated in?
I do remember doing searches in 14.
Okay. Do you recall finding any items of interest during those searches in 2014?
I believe in 14, I found a end of a shoelace.
The end of a shoelace.
Yeah.
If I showed you photographs of it, would you recognize it?
Yes, it would.
It was 336, 337, and 338, please. Let me approach, Your Honor.
You may.
You recognize those photographs, sir?
I do.
What are they?
They are pictures of the end of what could be a shoelace.
Okay. And are they fair and accurate depictions of what you saw in the field on the day that you collected that item?
Yes.
Move to admit. 336, 337, 338.
Mr. Moran?
No objection, thank you.
They'll be admitted.
Thank you. Permission to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you use the pointer to show the jury on the screen where the item is located that you found? And we'll move to 337. Very good. 338. Thank you, sir. And you can have a seat. If I showed you the item itself, would you recognize it?
I would.
Move to approach with Exhibit 339.
You can.
Do you recognize that item, sir?
I do.
What is it?
It is the end of a possible shoelace.
Okay. Is that the same item you saw in the field when it was collected?
It is.
All right. Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same conditions when you found it?
It does.
Move to admit 339.
Mr. Moran, do you object?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Submitted.
Thank you. During those searches that you continued, well, I should say, did you continue searching in the region while you were with La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
I'm sorry,
Sure. It was a poorly worded question.
yeah.
Did you continue to do other searches
Yes, we did.
in this case?
Yes.
And did you yourself ever find any other items of interest?
Not that I recall.
And during your time searching up there, did you ever find any of the other personal items relating to Dylan Redwine?
No, I did not.
No further questions.
Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. And may I retrieve that last piece of evidence that's provided?
Sure. As long as you don't go anywhere with it.
You bet.
There, not going anywhere farther than
I just want to make sure, I don't want it
Understood.
wandering off. As soon as you're done with it, it comes back up to the table.
Understood, sir, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to start with what I believe to be probably your first involvement, or the first day you were involved. Is that November 21st, 2012? Or were you involved earlier?
I would actually have to refer to my report to get that date.
Sure.
It-
I'm comfortable with you doing so,
Okay.
as long as everybody else is.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So you were in touch with Mr. Redwine that day to inquire after what time he was at his employer, United Pipeline. Is that right?
Correct.
And part of that is just to confirm his whereabouts, to check in and see if what he told you checks out. Is that right?
Yes.
And on that that day, as part of your follow-up after speaking with Mr. Redwine, you were in contact with employees at United Pipeline, right?
Yes.
And you were in,
Your Honor, this is beyond the scope.
Mr. Moran?
this was impeachment, and the foundation was laid with Sean Boris, but this informs the investigation that.
But I understand where you're going with it. I understand what you're doing. This was the prosecution witness, and that wasn't talked about.
That's fine, Judge. I'm not going to object to that line of
All right,
questioning.
go ahead.
Anyway, you remember speaking with a gentleman by the name of Sean Boris.
Yes.
And if it's been too long, that's fine. We can refer to your report again. But I'm going to ask you something fairly specific about what was going on in your conversation with Mr. Boris. He told you on November 21st, 2012, that he had in fact seen
Hey,
Mr.
just slow down just a little. Thank you.
that he had in fact seen Mr. Redwine at the office on November 19th, 2012.
Yes.
And you inquired further, and Mr. Boris said he saw Mr. Redwine briefly, but did not speak with him, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Boris did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine looked like he was in rough shape, did he?
Objection, Your Honor. I think we're beyond the scope of the impeachment.
I don't think so. I think it's okay.
Yeah, this was all foundation laid. Sir, is that accurate?
I'll have to check my report.
Sure. And it's the last, well, line 38 for me. I can point it out to you. It's the third paragraph from the bottom or so.
Hit one more time with the question, please.
Sure. It's in a minute. Mr. Brown, or Mr. Boris did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine looked like he was in rough shape, correct?
He did not.
And he did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine had been on a bender, right?
He did not.
Didn't say that Mr. Redwine looked pale and unshaven, haggard.
He did not.
And in the rest of that call that went on as part of your involvement in this investigation, you spoke with other employees and did not develop anything of evidentiary value in speaking with them. Is that fair?
Correct.
With respect to the tip of a shoelace that we see here, and this was something you found, as I understood it.
Yes.
This, when it was found, was placed in this plastic or paper bag. Is that right? Is that how it's done?
I would have to see the bag again.
And the other thing I'll inquire after as you look at the bag again is that it would include the date, the person who found it or recovered it, and the description of it along with GPS coordinates. So, may I approach?
Yes.
That's correct.
Rather than asking all of that question again, would you just describe what's on the bag? Thank you.
The bag describes what was found, GPS coordinates, case number, and date and time.
Also, the GPS coordinates. Did you say
Yes.
that? I was looking at something. Pardon me if I missed that. You mentioned this a little bit on direct, but you filled out a search warrant so that Mr. Redwine's phone could have a tap on it. Is that right?
Was collecting phone records, yes.
Good. It's a tap and pen register. Is that right?
Hold on. There's a difference between the two. A tap is a whole different deal.
All right. Your Honor would know better. I just wanted to check
So
if
pen
this was
register is
the right
probably
one.
what the search warrant was. All right.
Okay. There may be another witness. I'll move on. So, in an effort to be thorough and follow up, you went after psychic tips, right?
Correct.
And as I understood it, that shoelace that's in front of you wasn't found until 2014. Is that right?
Correct.
And it was found sort of in the general area where other items had been collected, a shoe and some other bones?
Correct, in the general area.
When the language that the prosecution used around this question on direct was that the sheriff's office followed up on tips that were outlandish. Do you remember that question?
There was some tips that were not your normal style tips.
And those were tips that sheriff's office resources were dedicated to following up on, right?
Yes, we did follow up.
And that diverted resources from Middle Mountain and the area where items were found as far out as 2014, right?
Say that one more time, please.
Sure. I mean, an officer who's following an outlandish psychic tip can't be up on Middle Mountain looking for things like you found in 2014, the shoelace tip. Fair?
Correct, during certain times of the year, for sure.
During that period, while those resources were being directed or diverted in that way, was anybody watching Mr. Redwine?
Not to my knowledge.
Were professionals brought in to excavate on Middle Mountain? Anthropologists?
Yes,
Okay. How long did they spend out there?
that I don't know.
Did they train sheriff's officers on what to do and how to collect evidence in that area where several items of evidence had been recovered?
I don't know if there was anything like that done. I was not a part of that.
There was some brief mention of that at first the warrant with respect to the phone didn't work, right?
Correct.
It had to be redone because there was an error. Is that right?
In the dates, yes.
And just to be clear, that's the phone records, correct?
Yes, if I wasn't clear, beg your
Okay,
pardon.
'cause there's
That's what I'm talking about.
There's a difference.
On November 23rd, 2012, that was the date that you had the San Juan County, New Mexico Sheriff's Office flying around the area of Vallecito. Is that right?
I would have to check my records for the exact date.
Sure. I believe it's on page 23. It's line 20.
Go ahead.
If you have that, I can provide a copy as well if you don't.
Yeah, that's correct.
And that helicopter was flying over the reservoir. Is that right?
On the 24th.
Okay. And the reason that, one of the reasons that you were aware of to direct those resources at Lake Vallecito was because there had been dog alerts on the water.
I don't remember.
My notes show that on
I'm not going to let you go any more about dog alerts. If you have something else, that's fine.
My notes show that on December 4th, 2012, you were in the air with the helicopter from San Juan County Sheriff's Office. Do you remember that?
I was not in the helicopter.
This is sort of a minor point. I'd prefer to just refresh your recollection if that's all right with everybody. May I approach with a report that was written by Mr. Gabbard, or Ranger Gabbard?
And what's this about?
That he was in the
I'm
air on
objecting.
December 4th?
Well, hold on, okay? I asked him what it's about, and then I was gonna get to you, so that way you'll know whether or not you're objecting to that, okay? What's it about?
That he was in the air with San Juan County, New Mexico Sheriff's Office helicopter searching the area on December 4th, 2012.
What's your objection?
Relevance.
The prosecution was inquiring after the searches that were being conducted by air. This is follow-up on that in the brief.
Right, but why do we care if he was there or not?
Well,
I mean,
I care now because he said that he's not, and because I've been challenged on it by the prosecution. I was mentioning it's a minor point, but
I'm not gonna let you do it, just move on.
New Mexico State Patrol also assisted by sending a dive team, right?
Correct.
And that was on November 12th, or November 25th, 2012.
That sounds correct.
And you were out there, observed the dive team create a grid for searching Cedar Lake,
I assisted from the shore.
and saw the divers entering the water.
I did.
And then you were interrupted to take a report from a psychic, right?
I would have to review my report on that. I'm sorry.
Halfway down the page.
Correct.
On November 26th, back on the dam with the dive team, is that right? We come from page 35.
Correct.
And took another report from a psychic, right?
I am not finding that.
At this point, I'm going to object. This is a waste of time under 403.
Mr. Moran?
I'll move on.
Thank you. And please don't tell the jury what you're thinking. That's what, when I made the pretrial ruling about speaking objections, it goes to responses too. All right? The editorial comments are not allowed. You stop it. It's not the first time people have done it today.
On December 20th, 2012, you went out to Mr. Redwine's house with a dog team, right?
I don't recall that. I'll have to look.
Objection, Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of direct.
This is beyond the scope.
This witness testified about his involvement in a very thorough investigation. This is follow-up on that same issue.
It's beyond the scope. Particularly with the pretrial hearings we've had and some previous conversations with the bench, if there's going to be dog evidence, those handlers can testify and you can talk about it then. So move on.
This is a precipient witness to what occurred.
This is, so now you're telling me something different? And how does this help you advance your case?
I don't want to make a speaking account of what this would show.
I don't see how this helps you advance the case. So beyond the scope, you can keep him under subpoena if you need him later.
That's what we'll be required to do, and I'm afraid that would cause delay. But we can resubpoena.
Well, everything, it seems to me, is causing delay today for a lot of different reasons. If that's what's required, that's what's going to happen. Move on.
On June 28th, 2012, do you recall going to a vigil for Dylan Redwine at Eagle Park?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
This informs the investigation. This investigator is chasing down psychic tips and working with dive teams and helicopter teams. The thoroughness includes the work done at this juncture.
Objection sustained.
You followed Mr. Redwine into New Mexico so his truck could be seized.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope. Counsel is well aware of the scope of direct examination.
I am. This is the investigation, but this
Okay,
investigator...
this is all beyond the scope, Mr. Moran. If you want to call him back in your case, you can do that.
Do you recall a conversation with Mr. Redwine in April?
Objection,
Well,
beyond the
we don't
scope.
even know when it was, do we? Let me
I didn't bring up,
first.
I'm sorry, I did not bring up any conversations with Mark Redwine in this case.
And I don't remember any. So, Mr. Moran, unless you have something within the scope, you're going to have to save everything else for later.
The animal scat that you testified about on direct examination, do you recall whether it was ever tested to see which sort of animal predator it came from?
I do not recall that.
So we're going to have to, that's all I have.
Any redirection?
Yes. Ranger Gabbard, were you aware that Mr. Sean Boris spoke to multiple investigators after speaking with you in the case?
I was not aware.
And do you recall that your conversation with him appears to be very short?
Yes, it was.
And you didn't conduct a thorough and detailed interview with him, did you?
I did not.
When you sought out the records from CenturyLink, you said that you requested a search warrant?
Correct.
And did you receive a court order to receive those records from CenturyLink?
I did.
No further questions.
Anything from the jury? Okay, you're done with the prosecution. Talk to Mr. King on your way out so he has your contact information in case they want to call you back. Yep. All right. Your next witness?
People call Tanya Galbraith to the stand.
All right. So this does not have to be on the record. We do have a hard stop at 5, so if there's a place around 5, before 5 that you think is a good place to stop, let us know.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Come on up to the witness stand, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi,
How are you today?
fine, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
I'm Tanya Galbraith.
And how do you spell your name for the record?
First name is Tonya, last name is Golbrite.
Thank you. And what do you do, ma'am?
I am a deputy for La Plata County Sheriff's Office,
Okay. How long have you been with La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
approximately 18 years.
All right. And you actually took a little time away from the Sheriff's Office, is that right?
Yes,
And when was that?
In 2017 to 2018.
Okay. And prior to departing in 2017, what was your rank?
I was a lieutenant of the criminal investigations unit,
And as a lieutenant, what were your responsibilities?
supervising the investigators in criminal investigations. And I also took cases and on call.
And why did you leave? Just briefly.
I thought I was ready to retire.
Okay. Did you end up returning back to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, I did.
And within the Sheriff's Department, when you return, even after a short absence, do you retain your rank, or is that not mandatory?
No, I started back at the bottom on patrol.
And that's why you're currently a deputy?
Yes.
So back in 2012, what was your role within the La Plata County Sheriff's Department?
I was a sergeant investigator, and I handled cases.
Okay. Did you have any involvement in this case involving Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Yes.
What was your role?
I was a supporting investigator. Usually when cases like this come out, it's all hands on deck.
Okay. And you're sort of soft-spoken, as I'm sure you know. So if you wouldn't mind just making sure to scoot in just a little closer if you can, or just speak louder into the microphone.
Okay.
There we go. That's better. Tell us about how your involvement in this case began.
Well, I initially wasn't in town when this all started. I was on vacation. When I returned, my first involvement was with a meeting with some of Dylan's family.
And who did you meet with?
It was Elaine Redwine, Corey Redwine, and his then girlfriend, Crystal Gilliam, I believe is how she pronounces her last name.
Okay. Was Mike Hall present in any of those early meetings?
Not this first one.
Okay. And early on in this investigation, did you take any steps to investigate Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall?
Yes.
What steps did you take to investigate them?
I confirmed their alibis.
How did you do that?
I contacted their supervisors, co-workers, and collected receipts.
Okay. And did you, at the end of that process, what was your conclusion regarding their potential involvement in Mr. Redwine's?
Hold on.
The basis for this answer flows from hearsay. If she contacted coworkers, supervisors, and even the receipts, Your Honor.
But this goes to explain why they weren't investigated further as suspects, is my understanding. It's not the truth of the matter asserted, correct? So
Well,
why would that be a hearsay objection?
Well, the reason for its admission is different than the substance of the evidence itself, which is hearsay. Just
Right.
because hearsay explains something.
No. The reason for the admission is part of the hearsay rule, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Offered for the truth of the matter asserted, back end of the hearsay rule.
Right.
It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's not hearsay. It's
I-
overruled.
Hearsay within hearsay.
Well, you've got hearsay within something else, but not hearsay within hearsay. Go ahead, Mr. Champagne.
At the end of your investigation into the alibis of Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall, what conclusions did you draw regarding their involvement in Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Objection relevance. Her conclusions regarding this are not for the jury's determination.
Did you want to stipulate that they had nothing to do with this?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you want to stipulate they had nothing to do with this?
I'm confused by the court's question.
Well, you're saying this is irrelevant. It's
Correct.
relevant if they're suspects. Or if you want to stipulate that they have nothing to do with Dylan disappearing, that's fine. Then we'll move on.
I think that's I think the way the court's framing it respectfully is a macro issue. I think asking an investigator what were your conclusions as to these investigative issues regarding these players is ultimately a determination of fact to be made by the jury.
Which is allowed by the rules. So you made a relevance objection.
Right.
If you're willing to stipulate that the Halls and Corey had nothing to do with it, then it's irrelevant. Otherwise, it's relevant.
I'm not gonna make that stipulation, nor am I not making that stipulation.
Go ahead.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Were you able to, at the end of your investigation into the alibis of those three people, were you able to draw any conclusions about their involvement in the disappearance of Dylan Redwine?
Yes,
What was your conclusion?
that they weren't in the area when Dylan went missing.
Did you clear them as suspects?
Yes,
During your early stages of the investigation, you said that you met with the Halls and Mr. Redwine, Corey Redwine?
just Elaine, Corey, and Crystal first initially.
And tell us about that meeting, without getting into what everybody said. What was the purpose of the meeting and where was it held, that sort of thing?
It was sort of a briefing and to kind of talk with the family, get to know Dylan a little bit more, what kind of things he was into doing. We got descriptions of potential clothing and cell phone, iPhone, or iPods, stuff that might be on him.
Do you recall the date of that meeting?
I believe it was November 23rd, 2012.
And was that the first time that you'd met these folks?
Yes.
How would you describe their demeanor during this meeting?
They were stressed, tired, honestly looked a little dirty, very tired, overwhelmed.
Okay.
Everything I would imagine somebody would look like in that situation.
Okay. Was there any crying during that meeting?
Yes,
From who?
mainly Elaine.
Other displays of emotion besides crying that you can recall?
Yes, there was some anger.
During these early days of the investigation, did you have contact with Mark Redwine as well?
No,
During these early days of the investigation, did you make effort to contact some of Dylan's friends and classmates?
yes.
How did that occur?
We called in, we got a group of CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and Federal Bureau of Investigations. They came in to help, and I was assigned to partner up with another FBI agent, and we went to the Bayfield Middle School to talk to friends and classmates.
And how many folks did you think you talked to during that time?
10, 12.
All right. What type of questions were you asking those folks without getting into their answers?
What kind of kid Dylan was, what did he enjoy to do with his free time, what was his, was he a happy kid, was he a sad kid, was he a depressed kid, did you ever know him to run away, did you ever know of him, we asked about his cell phone use and contact, what his relationship was with his family, general stuff like that. And if they had heard from him since he was reported missing.
And had they?
No.
Do you recall the names of the people that you spoke to?
Some of them.
Okay, who do you recall?
Ryan Nava, Fernando Stubbs, Wesley Rayburn, Garrett Donahue, Skyla Ribel, Carolyn Cook, Tristan Reeves. I'm probably missing some, but that's who I can remember off the top of my head.
Was Dylan, did he have a reputation of being a pretty frequent communicator?
Yes.
Objection, hearsay.
I don't know that it's hearsay. Talking about reputation.
Foundation then, as well.
Well, talked to people who would know him. So there's a foundation right there. Does he have
Right.
any other objections?
Right. And this information flows from the hearsay statement of those folks.
Reputation comes from hearsay.
Right.
Right.
That's
And
the
and
objection.
there's a specific rule about it. So far, you're overruled. Go ahead, Mr.
Was he known as a pretty frequent communicator among this group of people?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, had any of Dylan's friends or family heard from him after November 18th, 2012?
No.
Did you have any role in collecting phone records in this case?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall whose phone records you were seeking?
I was seeking Mark Redwine's, Dylan Redwine's, and Ryan Nava's.
Okay. And this may be a question that you may or may not know the answer to right off the top of your head. Do you recall the phone numbers that you were seeking? And it's okay if you don't.
I do not.
Okay. Would it help refresh your recollection to look at some of your supplemental reports?
Probably.
All right. One moment, please. I may approach supplement number 146 on page 190, Counsel?
146?
Correct. Take a look at this and see if this helps to refresh your recollection.
Yes, it does. I probably can't memorize them that fast, though.
That's okay. Let me ask you a little bit about the process. What was the process that you went about in trying to get these phone records?
Well, we were pretty sure that there was important information that could be learned from these devices. And with past experience, I know that writing search warrants for cell phone records can take a lot of time. So I put requests in for exigent purposes so we could get the information faster.
What does exigent circumstances mean, just briefly?
It's still a document that you fill out. You put in that it's under exigent circumstances, like a missing child, someone that's in grave danger. They will provide those records promptly.
Do you later follow up with a search warrant or court order for those records?
Yes, I did production of records for all the exigent search warrants I wrote.
Okay.
To satisfy those.
And did you get records relating to telephone number? One moment, please. Ending in 5448 from Verizon.
Yes,
And do you know whose phone number that was?
that was Dylan Redwine's phone.
Did you get records from AT&T for a telephone number ending in 8032?
Yes,
And do you know what records that related to? What
Mark
person?
Redwine, sorry.
I'm sorry, what person that related to?
Mark Redwine.
And do you know whether that was his personal phone number or a work phone or home phone? Do you know anything?
I believe it's his personal phone.
Okay. And did you get records from AT&T ending in telephone number 8303?
Yes,
And can you tell us what phone number, what person that number associates to?
Ryan Nava.
If I might come and collect that document. Did you also seek out phone records relating to Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall?
No, I did not.
Are you aware of whether they actually gave their records to law enforcement?
Actually, they voluntarily handed their devices over to our IT department to be downloaded, so I didn't have to write warrants for them.
One moment. Have you ever heard of the term in law enforcement known as a tower dump?
Yes.
What is a tower dump? Please describe that for the jury.
A tower dump is when a tower is dumped, it provides information for all cell phones that are in a certain area where those towers are located. It provides information for those cell phones in a certain period of time that it's requested.
And did you request a tower dump in this case?
Yes.
And which tower were you seeking records from?
There was one for AT&T and one for, I believe it's called Newstar/ComNet. Is that, no?
Why did you seek records from those towers?
Those were the towers that were located in Vicedo area.
Are there other towers, to your knowledge, in 2012, were there other towers in that area?
No,
Those are the only two towers up there.
that I was aware of.
Okay. Did you in fact receive those records that you sought, both for the phones and for the tower dump?
Yes,
And did you review those records yourself?
some of them.
Okay. Did you find any evidence of any communication from Dylan Redwine after November 18th, 2012?
No.
As part of your work in this case, were you able to isolate or identify a telephone number belonging to Mark Redwine's attorney?
Yes.
And how did you go about that?
That was an interesting experience. I found the phone number in Mark's records for November 19th, 2012. I wanted to find out who that phone number belonged to, and I had our crime analyst run the number in a search system that we have. And it came back to a woman that didn't end up being who we were looking for. And I went back and looked at the number, and I had transposed the last two, or the crime analyst transposed the last two numbers, and it just happened to, that was his attorney's number.
How did you know it was his attorney's number?
Because I called the number.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with that person?
Yes, I did, and I called asking, I think I was looking for a woman by the name of Beverly McAllister, and I asked for that person. This woman on the other line said, no, you have the wrong number, and I said, okay, and hung up. And then I'm looking at the number, and I asked her how long she had the phone, and she said 1.5 years. So I was confused. I went back and looked at the number that our crime analyst had ran and saw that the last two numbers were switched. So then I called her back again, and I advised who I was, why I was calling her, and asked if she knew who Mark Redwine was. And she said that she didn't feel comfortable talking about that.
Okay. Were you able to determine eventually that this was her attorney, his attorney, excuse me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to change topics with you. We're going to talk briefly, well, for a couple of minutes about tips and tips that may have come into law enforcement in the early stages and throughout the case. Did you receive any tips regarding this case?
Yes.
And how would you describe the volume of tips in the early stages?
They were coming in waves, lots of tips.
Okay. How did law enforcement go about handling these tips?
They would be assigned to investigators, patrol deputies. We even pulled somebody off patrol to come and handle just tips. So so they just kind of got divvied up between people that had time to do it.
Do you know how many tips came in over the course of this case?
906 plus.
Plus, meaning more than 906?
I imagine there's more, but at least 906.
At least 906, okay. Were some of those tips that came in from psychics?
Yes.
And how did you treat those types of tips?
We treated all the tips the same,
Why is that?
because if I ever found myself sitting here for this case, I wanted to be able to confidently say that we did everything we could.
Do you recall a tip regarding a sighting of Dylan Redwine in Moriarty, New Mexico?
Yes,
Was that, to your knowledge, was that tip run to ground?
yes,
Run to ground. That's fine. And do you recall a tip coming in from a local gas station?
vaguely.
Okay, what do you remember about that?
I remember somebody calling in a tip saying that they thought they saw Mark and Dylan in an altercation at the gas station. Maybe Mark pulling Dylan into a vehicle, but it was later determined that that wasn't, it was different people, not Mark, not Dylan.
Okay. Do you remember a tip coming in from a woman by the name of Angela Lee?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
she is a postal worker that works in Vicedo, and she believes that she,
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, we will have additional witnesses coming in. I believe defense probably will too, to discuss this matter. My purpose in requesting the basic outlines of this information was to describe the investigative steps taken by Investigator Golbrite to track this tip down.
So it's being offered to show why this part of the investigation occurred.
Yes, Your Honor.
You're not believing that this is correct.
That is also true.
So it's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then it's not hearsay.
It's being offered to rebut. Permission to make a record at the bench, because Your Honor doesn't like it when we get into our factual hypotheses.
I know exactly what you're going at. I think it makes sense to have this now. You can still do what you intend to do. I mean, we've had hearings on this issue, not specifically whether or not how it would be addressed by the DA. So I'm going to allow it to go forward. I don't think you need to come make a record.
And I'd ask,
It's pretty obvious what you've done. If you want to make a record at the end of the day,
my other request is that it not be characterized as a tip. As we've all spoken about just now, this was a full-blown investigation regarding this information from Angela Lee, not a tip on the phone. I think that misrepresents the state of the evidence.
didn't it come, that I don't know. They can refer to it how they want. You can refer to it as you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can
And
you
in
give...
fact, I don't want to do it at the end of the day. I know my court reporter has to be somewhere. So that's the problem. Why don't you come up and make your record? But if you're going to come up, I want you to come up.
Investigator Golbrite, we're going to get into that topic at a later time. So I'm going to shift topics with you. I want to talk with you a little bit about searches and searches that were done in the case. Can you describe the search efforts that were made in the early part of the investigation to the best of your knowledge?
On Middle Mountain?
As you see fit. Just some of the searches at the beginning from what you recall.
Okay. Well, we did a lot of little searches here and there, some of them based off tips, some off of other reasons. But in the early stages on Middle Mountain, we started, myself and Roy Vreeland were at the very bottom of Middle Mountain, and we did about 8-mile search at the bottom.
And do you recall that search occurring in May of 2013?
Yes.
And do you recall, you said the bottom of Middle Mountain, kind of, is there a particular road or area that was part of that search?
Yes, it's called Tucker Lane, and it's towards the end of the road. We parked and searched that area.
Okay. If I showed you a map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Exhibit 500. Does that look familiar?
Yes.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of that search?
Yes, it is.
Move to introduce Exhibit 500.
Any objection?
No objection.
It'll be admitted.
Thank you. Motion to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you show the jury what we're talking about here?
Yes.
There's a pointer, and if you're going to stand up, please speak into the microphone next to the television.
Okay, the area that was
The pointer
searched.
extends too, if you want.
This area highlighted here in like the pinkish purple color is where we searched that day.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
That's fine. Did you find any items of evidence related to the case in that search?
No.
You can have a seat. Did you participate in a search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
Yes.
Can you tell us about how that search came together, the plan behind it?
Well, we put together groups of people that consisted of law enforcement, so La Plata County Sheriff's Office, Durango Police Department, Durango Fire, Upper Pine, Search and Rescue, and other private search agencies that were willing to help.
And if I showed you a map, a topographical map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Before I go there, just a very brief foundational question. Were there, in fact, remains relating to Dylan Redwine found during those searches?
Yes.
If I may approach with Exhibit 224, please.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And how would you describe it?
It is a map of the Vicedo area, and it depicts Mark's house, Middle Mountain Road, and some of our search area.
Okay. Is it a fair and accurate description of what it displays?
Yes.
Move to admit People's 224.
No objection.
224 is admitted.
Permission to publish?
Yes.
There's a circle on the left side of the map with a text box. What does that text box display in that circle?
Mark Redwine's house.
And then towards the center and above the previous circle, there's a circle and a text box. What does that display?
The recovery site, the first recovery site.
First recovery
for
site.
Dylan's remains.
Okay. And Investigator Golbrite, are you familiar with how to interpret topographical maps?
Somewhat.
Okay. How would you describe this area where the remains were found, the first recovery site?
Steep, rugged, lot of ground cover, down trees, loose boulders, treacherous in parts.
And we see a red line that is traveling through the screen. What's on that red line?
That is Middle Mountain Road.
We also see a purple line that intersects with that red line. What does that denote? To your knowledge. If you don't know, that's fine.
That's the entry point, Bear Creek entry point, I believe.
Let me ask you this question. On Middle Mountain Road, there at the recovery site, is there also an ATV trail that intersects?
Yes,
Is that consistent with where that purple line is located?
yes.
Is there a gate on Middle Mountain Road below the recovery site, number one?
There is,
Is that red arrow consistent with the location of the gate?
yes.
As we look at that map, we see the circle, the top right quadrant of that circle seems to be covering an area where the lines are coming much closer together. What does that indicate to you?
Steep. It gets steeper.
And is that how you recall that area when you were there in person?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the search on in June of 2013. Do you recall when it began?
The date?
The date.
The 24th, I believe.
Okay.
23rd.
Would it help? Do you remember, or are you not sure?
I'm not sure.
Oh, that's
We did
fine.
a lot of searches.
Okay, that's fine. Would it help to look at your report?
Sure. Actually, I believe it was the 22nd through the 26th.
The 22nd through the 26th?
And then there was one search before that on the 21st. That was just Roy and I.
Okay. Did the search on the 21st produce any evidence related to the case?
No,
And on the 22nd, did the search produce evidence relevant to the case?
yes.
What occurred on the 22nd, to your recollection?
A black Nike Jordan shoe and a youth size 7 was located, and a Fila sock.
What was done with those items after they were found?
They were documented and collected, and then they were presented to Mike Hall and Corey Redwine for identification.
Were you present when that occurred?
Yes,
Can you describe how that process played out?
they did not touch the items, but they did look at them and positively ID'd them as belonging to Dylan.
How would you describe their demeanor during this interaction?
At first in shock, and emotion, even somewhat a little bit of happiness, just because we felt like maybe we were in the right spot.
All right. Your Honor, I'm at a convenient stopping point. I do need to make a record as well
That's
prior
fine.
to 5 p.m.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break at this point for the rest of the day. You know my admonitions, and I'll probably quit reading them to you at some time, but I'm going to go through them today. Please don't discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about the case on social media. In fairness to the parties of the lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial and reach your deliberation only during final decision. Reach your decision only during your final deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss this case in your presence. If they persist in doing so, please report that to me. Do not attempt to gather any information on your own. Do not engage in any outside reading on this case. Do not visit any places mentioned in the case. Do not read about the case in the newspaper. Obtain information about it from the radio, television, internet, social media, or any other media source. Do not in any way try to learn about the case outside courtroom conditions. We'll go with the same as we've been doing. I want you back at 10 to 8. Hopefully we'll start right at 8 or a few minutes thereafter. We'll go to about 5:15 tomorrow. But we do have a couple questions to ask you, Mr. Stein, if you want to stay behind for just a short period of time while everybody else is leaving. And then when we're done, since you're going to be gone, Cindy, I'll accompany Mr. Stein down, or have a court employee. Okay? All right. Everybody rise for the jury, please. And you can step down, Ms. Golbrite. You don't have to stay for this if you don't want to. So we can be seated. So, Mr. Stein, first of all, thank you for speaking up about what you noticed. That's, I guess, no good deed goes unpunished because you're still here. In any event, you indicated to the bailiff that you were familiar with or you knew Mr. Thank you, Patterson. I was going to call him by a different name. That was going to be totally wrong. Could you describe that a little bit for us? Okay. So you didn't know him well enough to recognize the name then. Anything about the nature of that relationship that's going to cause you to give his testimony either greater or less weight than you would other witnesses? And I had another question, just a second, I lost it. Could you describe, in terms of walking by him, I mean, was that pretty much it? You didn't actually work with him other than him doing security, is that? Okay, all right. Does either side wish to inquire?
One question.
Sure.
If Mr. Patterson's testimony, to your recollection, doesn't match another witness's testimony that's contradictory, based upon working in this, as you've described, with Mr. Patterson, are you more inclined to believe Mr. Patterson's testimony just because of that prior relationship or prior seeing him every day at work?
Okay. And I'm assuming there's not going to be any motions? Is that fair to say or not?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll be in recess till tomorrow. I want you to work on the exhibits because we have so many today, and then I'll come back and work with you. So I'll take Mr. Stein down just to make sure he gets in and out of the building.
All right.
Yes. Oh, sure.
We got a juror here if we're going to start making records.
Can you do it in the morning? All right, well then, can you just wait outside for me? Record can reflect the deputy's going to go out with him just to make sure he doesn't get contacted by anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. I'll be brief. I'm sure the court was surprised on the objection amendment and surprised that objection.
Sure.
Rule 902 reads as follows: extrinsic evidence of authenticity. Extrinsic evidence of authenticity as a condition precedent to admissibility is not required with respect to the following. That's the CRE now. Go down to 11 and explain that the original duplicate domestic records for each subject, the And then it lists the three business record criteria. That's the some attestation that we provide in the discovery. And finally, it says a party intending to offer a record in the evidence under this paragraph must provide written notice of that intention to all adverse parties. Must make the record and affidavit available for inspection sufficiently in advance of their offering the evidence to provide an adverse party a fair opportunity to challenge.
Sonar, if I may, we'll stipulate all that.
Hold on,
I agree.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm agreeing too, so far. But the rule doesn't say anything about that they have to object in advance, and I didn't know if there's any case law on it, is there?
No, Judge, I was unable to find a case directly on time objection. However, what I can tell the court is that the whole purpose of the rule is the objection is practice. The purpose is that you be blind to the
Oh, I understand all that. I understand all that. My problem is the attestation says, this is the record attached. It's not attached, and it has no other identifying documents or way to identify it, and that's what my problem is.
I understand. They come electronic. But that's not, I can tell the court that when we filed the notice that what we're saying in the notice is that the records were not our expectation is to advance for filing section. So we filed this back in March 2020. We filed multiple updates. Just for those reasons, we need to check time. Well, we have 6 million, the reality of the situation, I know that listed on that, okay. Divided in defense, the defense on page 18 of 646 discovery.
So where does it say centrally on that, on the declaration of the custodian? Because I looked for that, and maybe it does say. It does say. I missed it. I was looking at the body of it.
And so, Judge, we could go witness by witness and call the investigators that we fit, but the purpose of the notice is that it's objection to all that stuff. Our additional witnesses, etc. So I'm just asking for it to review that we give that notice, whether it's objection to time, whether the witness had it in discovery for probably years. We'd like to proceed with a trial presentation on that disruption. So I'm just flagging it now, and court Golbrite file home.
All right. I will state that it's been 19 years that I've been a judge, almost 19 years. And back in the old days, they were always attached, which is why I didn't know they were coming now electronically, just to keep them from being attached. And are you stating as an officer of the court that this is the attestation for these records from Century?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe that any that we, and counsel corroborate is accurate, but my understanding is Captain Bell followed that every one company has a panel that make sure that they get an attestation of specific records. The other investigations need to proceed to go out and investigate. But any that we put in matters that are going to be filed.
And the rule actually talks about a company, it doesn't talk about attached, it's just the attestation. So, Mr. Moran, anything that you want to say about whether or not it should have been considered?
No, I mean, I think that the notice is so that we can prepare to meet it if it's properly provided. What we've got is what was handed to us in the middle of this examination. Well, unless we dig through, are we at thousands of pleadings yet? At any rate.
Well, you're at 18,646 in terms of discovery numbers, which I agree is probably a couple of years old. And I don't know how high they went. I know it up above 25,000.
Above 28,000 now, I think. So, at any rate, that document by itself tells us nothing, and that's what was handed to us in the middle of that examination, and it's not connected to anything. And for Mr. Redwine's sake, I'm not in the business of stipulating to that kind of thing.
Can you tell me what Mr. Johnson or Mr. Champagne, I don't care who has the records, what are the discovery numbers of the records?
I have it here, Judge. But I would also note,
Can you answer my question, and then you can say what you want to say? Maybe.
If I may,
No, I want this question answered and then we can talk.
18,646 to 18,654.
So it's right next to each other. I just hear it's coming in.
understood. My record is that the declaration's got to be signed in a manner that, if falsely made, would subject the maker to criminal penalty. Sorry, Aaron. And that the notice requirement is to provide fair opportunity to challenge properly attested documents. And
Right.
that's not what we've got, so that's the basis of our objection.
Well, that's a slightly different objection, but 335 is under penalty of perjury. It's sworn before a notary, and it's also cites 28 USC 1746, which I don't know what it says, but I assume that's something important. So with that, 335 will go into the court exhibit, and 334 or 336, I don't remember which one. Thank you. They're both admitted. And as soon as I do that, we'll be off the record. So we are off the record.
Thank you, Judge. Just, I'm sorry, to briefly
I
complete.
guess we're back on the record.
I apologize, Your Honor. Just to complete this process, there are going to be several other sets of records coming in under this same
I think
process.
I've made clear what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Judge.